And the next generation of networking will need to meet the accelerated growth and the emerging demands of a fully connected society. So what's the best way to densify the 5G wireless network while ensuring proper connectivity and content delivery all together with positive return on investment? Well, that's what TI Now's 5G series will answer in 2016 as we speak with leaders in the 5G space. On today's segment are Tod Sizer, mobile radio research lead at Nokia Bell Labs, and Peter Jarich, Vice President, Consumer and Infrastructure at Kern Analysis. And gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Abe.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Well, thanks for being with us. I want to start off right away, and I'll direct this to Peter, and of course I'd like Todd's input as well on this. Is there still a broad misconception that 5G is all about super fast data speeds, or is 5G now viewed as more of an enabler of new applications and devices?
So I think it really depends on who you talk to, right? So if we're thinking a general audience, right, the broader public to the extent that they understand how 5G is being messaged, yeah, every G has been about more data. So I think there's going to be this expectation that that's what it's about. And we hear some of these applications, right, AR and VR and contextual communications and all that great stuff. And so, yeah, I think there is still a bit of this thought that for one audience, it's just about the higher data rates. But I think as the specifications or really more the requirements have been hammered out, and there's that understanding out there, there is this understanding that really it's that classic set of different requirements that we've all seen the chart, right? So it's about, talking about more machine type communications, but also ultra broadband, but also very delay sensitive and mission critical capabilities. And so I think at least within the space of those folks who are in the industry, there is this understanding that's more about the use cases than the usage. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking to the wrong people. Todd, what do you think?
No, I agree. Certainly that is the flinch to say everything is faster and faster. And do we need higher speeds? Yes, there are some applications where we need higher speeds, like VR and AR. But there are many other applications that need to be enabled with new technologies that 5G will bring. Low latency is the one that is, I believe, most critical. And so people are also talking about vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure sorts of applications that can be enabled in the future. Those aren't going to require the gigabit speeds, perhaps, but they are a use case that people are intrigued about how we can enable, and so that's part of 5G as well.
So Todd, and I'll direct this towards you. So how do we, as an industry, figure out the necessary data capacity for these dozens, even hundreds of devices that each one of us may have over the next 10 years, let's say?
Well, obviously that's been a major question to answer for us in research, is what should we be planning to be able to enable in the future? And it's hard to know exactly because you never really know what the killer app is going to be. But what we do is we look at the sorts of applications that we believe people are going to want to enable in the future, where you can see the continuing growth of people expecting to be connected at all times. This move towards being connected wirelessly every time, everywhere, and the expectations of an always connected world are really driving the continued growth. We're not growing in the developed world with number of users or number of handsets. It's really in usage patterns. We don't see any reason to think that's not going to stop. So new applications that bring additional capacity needs, new displays, new types of devices, the move towards a lot of machines, a lot of industrial use in addition to consumer use. We add all those things together and we see that we have some significant issues to address in increasing capacity in our networks.
So Peter, of course, it's not only about data capacity, but it's also about supporting that usage. So what's the difference between data capacity and usage?
Yeah, I think so. It's a good question. Going back to some of what Todd was saying, yeah, if we're trying to figure out the capacity side of things, right? We don't do forecasts, but there's no shortage of folks that do forecasts on new services. So you can come up with any number of estimates of how much 8K video are we going to see, how much AR, VR are we going to see per person. But I think the usage side of things is really where the 5G conversation becomes,
I agree.
fun, but also for a lot of folks scary. And I say that in terms of, if you think about what happened with 1G to 2G, right? 1G to 2G, analog to digital was really about just more, right? More voice. 2G to 3G, we added in data. Really, it was really more data. 3G to 4G, more data. And so when we go from 4G to 5G, there is that expectation that's about more data. But the question is, what is that usage going to look like? Not just in terms of data, but in terms of those other capabilities. And I think what gets tricky is not just the consumer or basic enterprise side of things, but as we get into, and Todd mentioned some of this, specific verticals, right? What does the public safety vertical need? What does the healthcare vertical need? What does a manufacturing vertical need? What does automotive need? What do all these different audiences and constituencies that we haven't necessarily engaged with as much as in the past, and that's been the knock, right? That's been the knock on 3G and 4G and 2G before it. That traditionally those were developed, I don't want to say in terms of without input from the outside industry, but the knock's been that those were developed largely by vendors getting together, figuring out what's possible and how the network should evolve. And I think when we think about usage, it really comes back to who are those users, who are those constituencies, those vertical markets that we should be talking to. And we could always be doing better, but I think the market has done a pretty good job of starting some of that reach out on those as we figure out what 5G is going to look like.
So I think the two are very connected, of course. As the consumer has moved towards an expectation of being covered at all times. Let's not forget, 10 years ago, we felt fortunate if we had a connection to the outside world, and we would stick our head out the window to make a phone call. Today, that is absolutely, totally unacceptable. And so as our solutions have become always connected, you can start to think about a industrial sort of application, an expectation that you're going to get coverage everywhere, wherever the sensor happens to be. So I think the growth of the industry has created a environment where it's possible to think in new ways about new applications, industrial applications in particular.
Todd, I want to ask you about end-to-end performance. Of course, a very important principle of 5G. Can you illustrate for our viewers how this may apply to your average smartphone and really that relationship back with infrastructure, let's say, for example, a data center?
So we believe that we need to enable applications which have very short latency. This is important if you happen to be doing gaming on your device. It's going to be important if you want to do two-way video with people. That the speed at which the network needs to react to what you're doing to make it seem as though it's happening inside the phone instead of being across a distance. The latency is going to be a key parameter. So there are others, but let me talk about that one in particular. And so we believe strongly that in order to enable a low latency, very fast response device in your hand, we're going to have to change the architecture of the network in order to put a lot of processing as geographically close to the user as possible. Because we can't change the speed of light. The speed of light is what it is. And so this means that you likely have to put the server that is handling a application for you on your phone to within 30 to 50 kilometers away, certainly no farther than that, and maybe even less than that. If you do that, then that really changes the model of the networks that we're going to need to be providing into what we call a distributed cloud. And so moving from a centralized sort of solution to a distributed solution with smaller data centers that are located geographically close to the user is going to be a necessary change in the 5G network architecture that will enable new applications, enable you to do new things on your phone you couldn't possibly do before with the performance that you expect.
What I think is interesting there, just piggybacking on that, is when I hear you say, Todd, enabling low latency, it's making that possible for some applications, recognizing that some use cases, some applications won't necessarily require or have those same latency requirements. And so that really speaks to, again, one of those other issues of 5G is that it has to be flexible enough to handle, use cases that need low latency and maybe high bandwidth, and those that are more latency insensitive and need less bandwidth, and how do you handle all those diverse use cases? That goes back to that you need to be thinking about this from that end-to-end perspective,
Absolutely.
not
You're
just about the
absolutely.
RAN,
I mean, the
but
technology we call network slicing, and what we mean
yep,
by that is that for a particular user at a particular time with a particular device working on a particular application, he or she has a particular set of requirements it needs from the network. And so for each user in each application traveling at each speed, you need to think about them as individuals, not as a common denominator for all, but you need to have a network that is so flexible that it can handle these things as appropriate, as you correctly point out.
yeah, and I think network slicing just for me, and I think this has become a little bit clearer over the last year or so, a lot of people hear network slicing, and I think what they hear is core network resources or resources that are, somewhere in the service network, but that network slicing is also going to need to be touching radio resources. And for
Absolutely.
me, that really highlights when we think end to end, right? This idea that network slicing is going to have a view of radio resources as well as service core network resources that speaks to that it all has to come together.
Exactly. It's all the way from the handset to the content delivery. So not just core, all the way into content delivery. So if you're sending a video, the video server in the core that's providing the content needs to understand what your radio conditions are and then can optimize all the way from end to end. This is a key improvement we expect to see in 5G.
Peter, I want to ask you about, really historically speaking, it takes about 10 years to go from one generation of networking to the next. Do you think that 5G is moving at a rate to deploy sooner than that?
That really gets into the question of how do we want to define 5G, right? So do I think that we can move sooner? I think we will, right? I think there's no shortage of operators out there who've claimed that they're going to have trials or deployments up this year, next year. We know that major sporting events, whether it's the World Cup, whether it's Olympics in Korea, Olympics in Japan, are going to drive some of the timing. Are we going to see movement before that 2020 timeframe? Sure. But the question really comes down to what do we call 5G, right? So, you can think about this when we made the move from LTE to LTE Advanced. What defined the move to LTE Advanced? For some operators, it was just, hey, I've got carrier aggregation. If I got carrier aggregation, that makes me LTE Advanced. Great. Oh, wait, do I have carrier aggregation actually for users or just in the network? Does it matter if I just have it in the network, but I can't actually deliver it as a service? I'm going to call it LTE Advanced anyways. So when we think about the question of are we ready to move on 5G, it's going to really depend upon how someone wants to define it, right? So do they want to define it simply as I've got some level of millimeter wave spectrum use in my network, and so I'm going to count that as 5G? Well, sure, then they could probably do that very, very soon, well before the 2020 timeframe. If we think more holistically from a requirement standpoint, from that end-to-end view that Tod was talking about, having network slicing up, having your core as well as your RAN ready, with new air interfaces ready, not just for supporting millimeter wave, but also lower frequency spectrum. Yeah, I'm comfortable thinking that we'll be there in the 2020 timeframe, but getting to a full official, this is what 5G, we're all agreed upon it, and having stuff that matches that before that, I think it's tough unless we're thinking about 5G as a marketing term, which to be fair, it is, right? Even the ITU doesn't set out the term 5G in the same way they didn't set out 4G. There's more technical terms there. So recognizing that 5G, like 4G before it, was just a marketing term, I've got no doubt that we're going to see deployments before 2020.
Yeah, and I think we will. I mean, clearly there's the urgency of the Olympics, but the other aspect, somewhat technical aspect that I think is driving this, is Moore's law and the increasing use of general purpose processors in the solutions, both in the handset as well as in the network. And if you're in that world that things are software programmable, the expectation, certainly my expectation for my teams in research, is that we should be able to move at a IT pace and not an infrastructure pace. And so I do expect that the cycles of bringing new features online are going to be accelerating in the future because you have this benefit of much more flexible solutions that we're providing.
But there is and to be clear, Abe, that there's a bit of a beyond the are we going to move? I guess the one thing we need to think about is are there any worries about that? And the one thing that I've heard popping up from a couple corners of the industry is this question of if we do move too early, if we do move before standards are fully set or specifications are fully set, do we end up with de facto specifications where some deployments early on from some operators set de facto standards or de facto specifications that may not match what is going on somewhere else, and do we end up with fragmentation? I was a little bit of head scratching for the last 6 months as I heard a number of folks talking about, we need to be careful of fragmentation. We need to make sure this is a global standard. And, I was going, well, we're not doing that. Doesn't that seem to be the case? And as you dig into it, there does seem to be a little bit of this fear of, does early movement potentially set us up to have some fragmentation? So agree with Tod that we should be able to have some software definition here, flexibility to make sure that we can move quickly and still change if we have to. But I am noting a bit of concern out there of how soon is too soon and what precedence does that set?
Yep.
That absolutely sounds like a topic that we can discuss on a segment on its own. I'm going to move on, and I just want to talk about this very briefly. I'd like both of you to address this just for a minute. Let's talk about wired broadband. Even when 5G is fully deployed, and correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, a 100% uptime wireless connection is really not possible without wired broadband. Tod, I'll start with you. Is this because of the lack of spectrum? Is that the primary issue?
No, I think that wired broadband is almost always today connected to a Wi-Fi access point in the home, and I consider Wi-Fi one of the technologies of 5G. It's going to be integrated well with the other technologies, including LTE. LTE isn't going to go away anytime soon. And so the solution really should be about connection. How do we connect to users? And so some of that will be over wired broadband connected to a Wi-Fi access point, and some of it will be over LTE, and some will be over 5G. It's the coordination of those different tools that we have in our toolbox that I think 5G can bring.
Yeah, just going back to your question though, Abe, I think it's spectrum has traditionally been an issue. As we go to millimeter wave spectrum, whole new swaths of spectrum opens up, and so I'm not so sure that it's really just an issue of the amount of spectrum that's out there. You can obviously get better characteristics of the signal if you're talking about a wired connection than you can on a wireless, and so there's a whole bunch that's going on there. But I think really to Tod's point, part of the promise or hope of if we do 5G right is thinking about all these holistically. And so I think, we are seeing a lot of interesting trial stuff looking at fixed applications for 5G, but really, we need to be thinking about these from that use case side of things.
Now, I'm gonna finish up by asking an extremely rhetorical question because there's an obvious answer. But both of you have been in this business long enough where you can give me some feedback on this. What is the concern about the ROI for carriers as they've just spent millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, millions of dollars on 5G research leading up to this next gen network, and that's after spending billions of dollars on a fully deployed, or not even fully deployed yet, 4G LTE network. Peter, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's a clear answer, and it's they're all worried about whatever they do and the ROI of it, and I think that's where you see a couple things going on, right? One, you see 5G being cast within the larger purview of, as Tod mentioned, leveraging IT principles, right? So the idea of what we're doing in networks right now. I remember it was not too long ago when it was a panel talking about 5G and how SDN and NFV are going to be critical to what goes on in 5G. And someone says, so those are 5G technologies? And the panel just sort of came to a screeching halt going, no, you can start deploying those today, right? You should be, operators are doing this. And I think that's one of those places where you look, right, there is a worry about the ROI looking at 5G if you think about it as a completely new technology. But if you recognize that, yeah, it's going to be integrating SD and NFV principles, which you're already investing in and you need to. It's going to be integrating Wi-Fi, like Todd mentioned, which most operators are already doing. LTE is going to be a huge part of 5G, and to that extent, what's going on with LTE Advanced. And then you see the whole move for LTE Advanced Pro, right? This idea of what is this bridge between LTE and future air interfaces and capabilities with 5G. So completely right that you definitely see this worry about the ROI, but from an investment standpoint, not even talking about the new revenue side, but from an investment side of that, I think you see that being addressed by making sure people understand that 5G, although it's going to be a break, it's not going to be this hard break that has nothing to do with technology before it. It really leverages that investment, and it leverages what we're doing in the technologies that we're investing in today.
Yeah, two short points just to add. LTE isn't going away. It's going to be a big part of what 5G is, and 5G is really the first generation where we weren't trying to replace the generation before. I mean, if you think about the move from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4G, the expectation were that the boxes that were 3G were going to be eliminated. In 5G, we don't expect that to be the case. We expect LTE to be an important component. Will it at some point be replaced with 5G entirely? Absolutely. There will be no performance hit if that happens. But the investment in LTE will continue to pay off throughout the years. The second thing to quickly point out is that 5G brings with it the expectation that we will be adding many more users that in the form of devices that will be doing work on our behalf for humans. And so there are new revenue streams that we expect to be bringing in through these new use cases and new usage and new services that were simply unavailable to folks and industries in the past. And with that, we hope that the additional revenues that this benefit of this always connected connection provides industries will help our customers to manage the investment of this new 5G technology.
Well, Todd and Peter, we thank you so much for really kicking off our 5G series programming for 2016. I'm sure we'll try to circle back with both of you on a number of other topics under the 5G umbrella. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Abe.
And for our viewers, for all of our 5G series programming, please log on to tianow.org. And don't forget to register for TIA 2016 Network of the Future. That's TIA's annual conference in Dallas, June 6th through 9th. You can be there for a lot more on 5G and other industry topics. And for more information, log on to TIA2016.org. So long.